Hello, everyone. Welcome to the UCPN Podcast Festival and our Capitalism Ask Me Anything with Luigi Zingales. You scared? It'll be fine. My name is Matt Hodap. I'm the producer of Capitalism, among a couple other shows on the University of Chicago Podcast Network. As you should know by now, this is the Capitalism Podcast. Luigi is a co-host with Bethany McLean, who unfortunately could not be here tonight to witness this AMA. We launched the podcast almost 6 years ago. It's been 2 seasons, 163 episodes, and almost 3 million downloads later. We're finally excited to do our first live AMA with a couple of students who are students here at the University of Chicago. On stage, we have Luigi Zingales, professor at the University of Chicago Booth School of Business, creator and co-host of the podcast, along with 3 undergraduate students. Do you want to introduce yourselves? We can start here.
I'm Surya Gowda. I'm a 4th year in the college majoring in fundamentals, and I focus on political philosophy. And I'm also doing a joint MA in the social sciences, and I'm a political theory concentrator.
Wow. Hey, my name's Mete, and I'm a 3rd year in the college studying econ and cognitive science. Really interested in economic modeling, cognitive modeling, and I'm really happy to be here. Big fan of the podcast.
Hi, I'm Giuseppe Dicera. I'm a 4th year in the college, majoring in economics and minoring in molecular engineering. Really interested in health economics. I do a lot of research with professor here at U Chicago, and run my own startup as well. Been watching for quite a few years. My favorite episode is the moral case against the MBA. I was actually saying it was inspired me to apply to an MBA program. So thank you for that.
Fantastic. Hopefully we can talk a little bit more about that. So thank you all for being here. I think legally I should have started with this, but you are being recorded. And this recording is going to be used on the podcast. So people can go back and listen to all the fantastic things we're about to talk about again later. We will have some time for the audience to ask questions, about 25 minutes at the end, because it is a true AMA. But we're going to start. Each of the students will have about 10 minutes to ask questions, and we'll start with Surya.
Okay, well, my first question, was sort of a devil's advocate question because I am a philosophy major, so that's kind of what we do. But why exactly is competition good is my question, because someone I've been reading and researching lately is Joseph Schumpeter. So as you know, he has an interesting argument about competition and monopoly and whether competition is kind of coherent with creative destruction that drives economic progress. So I just want to know what you think of these theories in this vein.
Thank you. Is an excellent question because from a philosophical point of view, I think was a breakthrough of Adam Smith to think about competition as a positive element. Historically, has always been seen as a negative, and I think is really the mechanism that forces the pursuit of self-interest to work for the collective interest. And of course, there might be some exception or potential sort of a counterexample. And I think that when you're saying Schumpeter, there is now a long debate about to what extent you need some form of market power in order to have some profits that they reward innovation. So I think there is definitely that element. However, without competition, the pursuit of self-interest leads to tremendous distortions. And so if you want the pursuit of self-interest to work for the common good, I think that it works for the common good only if there is competition. And I know you are a philosopher. I don't know if you are also a etymologist, but the interesting thing is that, the word competition comes from, surprise, surprise, Latin, and is cum petere, is to seek together. And in some languages, actually, the competition in a race and the competition, the product market competition, have two different terms. So in Italian, we use concorrenza when we talk about the competition between businesses, and we talk about competition for competizione for a race. Okay, but the idea is that you have a system that forces people to seek something together, not one against the other. Okay, so unfortunately, there are a lot of examples, and we see, especially with the big tech these days, where instead of having a fair competition, you have now, you're too young to remember Tonya Harding. Have you ever heard about the story of Tonya Harding? That she was a skater that had a boyfriend kneecap the competitor. It was a big thing that came. You remember her? Yeah, yeah. So that is the negative aspect of competition, when you are actually trying to sandbag, to handicap the others, rather than understand that we are in a common search for the common good.
I found the connection to Italian particularly interesting because I wrote my undergraduate thesis on Machiavelli. So
Actually,
yeah.
I should recommend you a paper that makes the connection between Machiavelli, Malthus, and Mandeville, and Malthus and Adam Smith, because that's the tradition through which you have the separation between a moral attitude. So before Machiavelli, everything, of course, was morality. And Machiavelli is the first one to separate the two, of course, in the political science. But then Mandeville is the first one to start to understand that private vices can be public virtues. And that's kind of the step that lead to the intuition of Adam Smith. So there is a common thread.
Yeah, I find the idea that selfishness on maybe like the part of a leader, like especially in politics when we're talking about Machiavelli, I guess, and that self-interest can actually align with the public interest. Like that is a really fascinating idea. And I think that sort of relates to where I was going to go with your point about big tech. So I guess one question that I have that I found, I guess, on previous podcast episodes, like the one on the Twitter files, was this idea that the company, like private companies, aren't really acting in the public interest. But then how exactly do we solve that? Like, is democratic governance of social media a possible solution? Like, what do you think about proposals like that?
I think that's really the crucial point of a market economy, is how do you create rules within which competition leads to outcome that we are desirable and not undesirable outcomes. I think that that's the number one question. The number two question is, who's going to write those rules? Imagine even that we understand that there are some rules. Who is going to write those rules? And I think part of the old Chicago tradition thinks that you can just ignore the creation of rules, because competition for rules itself leads to a good outcome. And in the most extreme form, this is called anarcho-capitalism. And I think that that's a degeneration. I think that actually the world of cryptos give us a phenomenal real-world example how things don't work. You know, one of my favorite stories that is actually a paper by a political scientist is the story about the Silk Road, not the Silk Road, the Chinese Silk Road, but the Silk Road website, where hopefully you don't know what it is, because it is a place where they used to sell everything possible, from every form of drug and etc. And of course, you were paying with Bitcoin. So this was the ultimate example of a market without rules, in which you have competition. So you could, the Silk Road was a big website, but there were other websites that were competing. So Aldrich, I think, was the name of the owner of this website, was a libertarian anarcho-capitalist, and said, oh, I set rules, but I set my own rules because competition will lead to the good outcome. And one day, a customer blackmailed him because, the problem with all this virtual thing is that they need an interface with the real world. And drugs are not that much fun unless you don't consume them in person. So they need a physical delivery. And if they need a physical delivery, it means that you need to know who is buying those drugs. So one of the suppliers of drugs had the list of all the customers. And so went to Aldrich and said, I'm going to reveal all these names unless you pay me $100,000. And now this anarcho-capitalist, now in a normal world, you say, no problem, I call the police, right? But if you're an anarcho-capitalist, you don't want to call the police as a matter of principle. Forget that you're doing something illegal, so you don't care. But as a matter of principle, you didn't want to call the police. So now you're in a bind. There is somebody that, now this is a test for you. You're all studying economics. So you see this game. There is somebody threatening you with this. And what are you going to do? What is the only outcome you have? Can you pay this guy? You don't know who is he. He only can, he's threatening you. He shows you that he has the actual list of customers, and he's going to post it on the internet 2 days from now, unless you send a certain number of Bitcoin and etc. So, but if you pay him, he's going to repeat the threat. So there is only one solution, which is to try to kill him. So this guy, this anarcho-capitalist, he didn't believe in violence, etc., actually hired a contract killer to kill him. And he was stupid enough to actually contract an FBI agent, and so ended up in jail. But the point, this is a long story to say that in a competition for rules, unless you have rules to rule the competition for rules, is the law of the jungle, in which you go for the most violent one, not for the right system. So in my view, democracy is the only solution to this, because is the governance ruled by the many, where in most situations you hope that they choose for something that is good for everybody and not just for one side versus the other. So that's the hope. Now, in practice, there are a lot of distortion, of course, and that's what we discuss in every episode of Capitalism.
So, sorry, are we talking about democratic or democracy of the public or democracy of the shareholders in these companies?
Actually, democracy of everything. I'm a big believer, for example, in referenda. I know that this is unpopular these days, especially after the Brexit referendum. But to some extent, that's the example of how not to do a referendum. And first of all, England was a country with no traditional referendums. So people were not used to that. And second, the way the question was asked was the most stupid way possible, because you had the choice between a reality and a dream. And of course, the dream beats the reality, because you can make up your own dream, and the reality is one. I generally don't use Italy as an example, because it's not a very good example in many things. But on abortion, for example, was a phenomenal example, because we had a law, we created a law, and then we put this law to a referendum. So the choice was either you take this law, where we allow abortion with some limitation, etc., or you abrogate the law and you have no right to abortion. And in 1981, a country that is overwhelmingly Catholic voted 65% in favor of abortion. And we have not discussed the theme of abortion ever since. So that's the example of how you resolve. This is a moral issue. And I don't understand why it becomes a partisan issue, because the two things should be unrelated. And I think that you let people vote, decide, and you move on. And I think that there is a long tradition of referenda that work very well in Switzerland, in California, and even on abortion in the United States. There were all these people that were say, oh, there would be a terrible, but when every time people had to vote, they voted in a very reasonable way. The people in Kansas, they said, no, we want abortion with certain limitation, but So I think that I like direct democracy. Of course, there are some limitations direct democracy, but direct democracy, I think that should be encouraged more. Unfortunately, in the United States, we don't have it at the federal level. And I like direct democracy also in the corporate world that is completely shut down today. Actually, the Biden administration opened up the possibility of having a little bit more of discussion of certain important themes in corporate shareholders meeting. But traditionally, the SEC was blocking anything that was at vague sort of social impact, and I think was a real pity.
All right, moderators got to moderate, so I have to keep us moving along. So we're going to move to the next student. Remember, Luigi, we don't have the 2 hours we usually record that I cut down. I'm just joking. Go ahead.
You can always cut out my answers. I'm used to that. I talk forever, and then he'd like sapiently edit stuff.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's cool to hear about referendums that work. I mean, like Brexit is kind of my like biggest impression of a referendum, and I'm also Turkish American, so Turkey's not great with referendums either. So it's interesting to think about like how it could actually be productive. But we were talking about competition, and I wanted to ask a bit about antitrust. It's really big with the new merger guidelines that you guys spoke to on your show a few episodes ago. So my first question is related to an episode you did on the evolution of antitrust from August. And you mentioned the European Commission's ability to enforce antitrust decisions before companies get a chance to challenge them in court, which here like might seem super radical, but it gives the European Commission a whole lot more bargaining power in like enforcing antitrust decisions than the DOJ and the FTC get here. So I was wondering, what do you think about applying that kind of model in the US? And kind of on top of that, how do economists, while providing valuable insight, how do we ensure that economists don't overshadow democratic values?
Okay, let me separate the two, because the first one, first of all, I need to my lawyer, because it's mostly a legal question, and I'm not a legal scholar by any stretch of the imagination, so I'm afraid that I'm going to misspeak, but let me try anyway. The tradition in Europe is much more interventionist in general, and the ability of prosecutors to act and do injunction or put people in jail ahead of time is broader. The tradition of America is much more protective of your right. So I think it would be very, very hard to import that tradition here, in which the FTC can make injunctions and then companies will have to go in front of the judge to stop the injunction of the FTC. I don't see this happening anytime soon. So I'm not holding my breath for that. However, there are alternative solutions, which is to make it easier to bring some cases. And it says all of this is changing the status quo point where you start bargaining. Okay. And this is incredibly important from a practical point of view and a political point of view. And one of our defects as economists, we tend to be a little bit nonchalant as saying, oh, it doesn't really matter because eventually we're all dead, as Keynes was saying. So I think that is very important, the process, and the merger guidelines actually are going that direction, because when you say, we just say that if you own 80% of the market share, you don't need to prove a lot of things. We just assume you're a monopoly. Proved otherwise, that is the way to go. So some sort of rebuttable presumption that makes it easier to bring some cases, recognizing the enforcement cost. And this is the part that I find it most shocking, is that there is a long tradition, especially at the University of Chicago, but in economics, of But you know the name Gordon Tarlock. Does it remind you of something? No, I think you have not taken my class. It shows. Because
but I hope to.
because it was actually a very famous economist lawyer who graduated from the University of Chicago. And some people claim he deserved the Nobel Prize with Buchanan. When James Buchanan won the Nobel Prize, he was cut out of that deal. And because apparently he was not the most politically correct person and was very aggressive. And so not a lot of people like him. But the guy was really brilliant in many dimensions. And he was the first one to bring into economics, but when talking about 1967, so a lot of time ago, the enforcement costs and how much money we spend in enforcing. So when you think about the efficiency of antitrust, I think that one of the factors that should be brought in place is not only what are the final outcomes, but how much money is spent along the way. Because let me tell it to you, all these enforcement costs are waste from a societal point of view. And it says they make for good sort of champagne and sort of nice life for lawyers, but from a societal point of view, is completely a waste of resources. Okay, maybe a necessary waste to enforce, but if you multiply that waste by a factor of 3 or by 5, etc., the outcome might not change, but there is a lot more resources are wasted. So I think that one of the secrets in rethinking antitrust is to bring enforcement costs into the picture, and so changing the rebuttable presumption is very important. And answering your second question, which is about the role of economists. So one is being a bit more broad with the definition of efficiency. So we tend to be quite narrow-minded in what is efficiency. So we exclude, for example, enforcement cost, or we exclude the resiliency. So the just-in-time production is very efficient until it's not. Okay, so in expectation, it might not be that efficient. So that's one thing. And the second is recognize that people don't only eat bread, but they want also some intellectual satisfaction. So that is not just increasing the amount of bread is important if you're starving, but after a certain point, people are willing to give up some bread, metaphorically, for something else. So when people say, oh, but it's irrational to vote for Brexit because GDP will go down, I said, it's a choice. If you know that if you prefer not to have interference from the rest of Europe and be a little bit poorer, but be more free, who am I to make the decision for you? I think as an economist, we have to accept people preferences, and people preference might be that they prefer to be poor, but allegedly free. I'm not sure they're free, but you see what I mean.
Yeah. I know you were speaking a lot about litigation costs on the merger guidelines episode 2, and how that's kind of a skepticism with, like, sure, the guidelines look nice and they seem to be revolutionizing the antitrust landscape, but when Google or whatever multi-billion-dollar company has these multi-billions of dollars, then how can the DOJ do something about it? And that kind of brings me to a question I wanted to ask about a hub like Silicon Valley, where the kind of business model is, or a part of the business model is for startups to like just be a supernova and come up with a big idea and get it acquired. And that seems to have worked for a while. A lot of smart minds are in the business of coming up with that idea. So I was wondering if you could speak a little more to what you think this kind of revised merger guidelines implemented in a place like Silicon Valley will look like. Are you skeptical? Do you think that the companies are really just gonna do what they want and kind of outsmart the regulation, or is this really looking like a a change and maybe a stop to the model that I described?
So first of all, we're not even seeing the final merger guidelines because,
Right.
as you know, what was presented was a proposal. The period for comments ended, and now they have to revise the proposals. And so let's see what is done. Second, is just a starting point from which the DOJ or the FTC will start in determining whether they challenge or not a merger. And then we see what the judges will react, and how the judges will react to that. So it's very early to say what the consequences of this are, and particularly we don't know how the judges will receive that. It's very important to understand that the goal, of course, is not only not to damage innovation, but ideally to promote more innovation. And so I think there is a model that has been dominant in many cases for startup companies that develop an idea just to be bought. And that's a legitimate business model with a couple of caveats. One is that the kind of technology you develop is different, because I can only develop a new idea that is compatible with Amazon business model, because if it's incompatible with Amazon business model, I'm not going to be bought by Amazon. So for a long time, I taught entrepreneurship, and the first class was about how you start a business plan. And one of the first questions I had for students is, you need to plan the exit now. I said, we didn't even start a company. How do you plan the exit? No. I said, it's fundamental, because the way you build a business is as a function of how you expect to exit. And there are not a lot of ways to exit. One is to be acquired. The second is to go public. And the third is to do a management buyout and cash out, okay? But if the business does not support a lot of that, the third is out of the picture. So at the end of the day, you have only two options, is an IPO or a sale to the existing businesses. And when the existing businesses are very limited, then you start from day one to say, I'm going to plan this. If you don't have the IPO option, the only thing is I need to build a business that is compatible with Amazon. And that's not necessarily the most creative and innovative business, because the really disruptive innovation is the one that changes a business model. So if I only develop ideas that are compatible with the existing businesses, I am curbing innovation. So we want to maintain the vitality of people that revolutionize the way you do business, because that's the way innovation comes about. Okay, so that's the purpose. Now, does this mean we should prohibit Amazon from buying anything? No, but we shouldn't make particularly easy for them to buy, especially early on at a low price when people don't even know what they are, and monopolize the market even more. I think that to me would be the goal. Now, how to achieve this goal is not a piece of cake.
Yeah.
All right. Contestant number 3, come on down.
Lucky winner. Thank you. Let's talk about energy. I want to talk about financial markets as well, but I was really interested. All the conversation was going on. Entrepreneurship is great. But I'm curious to hear, kind of, as the world transitions away from fossil fuels, how do you think that the switch to green energy will affect global energy markets? Like, will we see the same fluctuations in energy prices that we did in the oil shocks of 1973, 1978, 2021, or will greener energy bring more stable markets?
So I guess depends a lot on what you intend for green energy. If you limit to solar and wind, I think that there is a fundamental difference, which is the one of the scale of production. So fossil fuel tend to require large scale of production. And so that leads naturally to more concentrated markets, where it's more difficult to have a reliable price. So when California liberalized the energy market, the end of the 90s, early 2000, was a freaking disaster. Why? Because they didn't understand that while there are a lot of producers, at the end of the day, the marginal producers were few because the market is concentrated. And those could easily manipulate the market by shutting down for renewal or cleaning, etc., one particular producer at the right time. Okay, so that was really, really a huge power on the hands of producer. The great thing of the green energy is that at some level we can all be producers, so the market becomes really fragmented, and so it becomes more competitive. Now, for this to be the case, we need to have a very good grid system. You know that today, the biggest obstacle on moving to a green energy is not lack of incentives to go green, is lack of access to the grid. So that if you tomorrow want to transform half of the production of energy in Illinois into green, you don't have access to the grid. And so what do you do with the energy? You eat it, which is not particularly useful. So I think that there is a desperate need to create a reliable grid, able also to accept a diffuse production, because we want a system that reward the producer at the proper price. And in most places, if you inject energy in the network, you pay a fraction of what others are paid. So there is a really injustice against the green energy, but this is not necessarily due to the fact that people conspire against the green energy. It might also be because of that, but is because the grid is so poor. So this is a typical example in which, in order to have a good market system, you have to have a good infrastructure, and that infrastructure needs to be publicly provided in some form, because it tends to be a common good. Okay, so you need to have a good infrastructure in order to have a good market, in a good market. And the future, honestly, is much better than the past, because the past is concentrated. And so we did a lot of wars for oil, and hopefully we're not going to do any more war for sun, because it's everywhere.
That's interesting. Yeah, I just background. I did some research. I asked ChatGPT the same question, and basically said something similar along the lines of there will be less volatility, but kind of putting our U Chicago econ brains on, questioning that. If I expand green energy to include maybe like batteries, and that includes chip manufacturing, can you see a situation where like geopolitical issues really get into affecting financial markets in this particular way, considering this huge transition in the automotive industry towards electric vehicles? Like that sort of transition, how do you see that playing out in the markets as well?
Certainly, and it's just, I'm not an expert in the sector. I don't know exactly all the materials are needed to produce the battery, beside the lithium that even I know that is necessary. But if you are telling me that there are a bunch of rare earth material that are only present in one country in the world, then that's problematic, because that country will have some form of monopoly power. And so that will create, of course, geopolitical tension and all the things that come with it. If that's not the case, I think that the future looks brighter than the past. However, what is important, and we're not used to thinking in those terms, is at some point we need a switching. Think about electric cars. We're slowly creating infrastructure to supply energy for the electric cars, but it took a long time to have all the gasoline suppliers along the way, et cetera, and there will be a moment in which the gasoline supplier starts to disappear, and then there will be a fast death of the combustion engine car, because if you don't have the supply all over the place, it's not worth driving, right? It's too dangerous to drive. And but there would be a switching point. There are non-linearities in the process, because once the mass of users is going to be small enough, then the support network, especially in the countryside, is going to disappear. If let's say that 60% of the cars are energy based, EV, then do you want to have a gasoline supply in the middle of the countryside? Probably no. And then at that point, you start saying, wait a minute, do I want to have a combustion engine car? Because if I had to drive a long distance, now one of the big advantages, I can drive a long distance and no problem. But now I need to figure out where the gasoline distributors are, and they are going to die sequentially. And so at some point, people will switch dramatically into energy. So the process is not going to be linear. It's going to have some bumps in the road. But I think that the direction is there. And the other benefit that people don't talk enough about this, but the other benefit is will make our cities much cleaner. I spent a month in Milan, and it's hard to breathe. You can feel like the pollution in your lungs when you go around, because thanks to the German car producer, the standards in Europe are much more tolerant than the one in the United States. And Milan is in the middle of the plain, so it gets all the smog stuck there, but it's really, really painful. The beauty of having, especially Italian cities that are small and kind of everybody's on top of each other, not having the smog is going to be a game changer.
The fog could also come from the Derby della Madonnina. You never know. Milan versus Inter, always good stuff. But I also want to ask, kind of changing topics. I want to talk about shadow economies. So be curious to hear your opinion on, in some countries, the shadow economy makes up a huge percentage of the country's GDP. So in Bolivia, it's over 54%. In Italy, it's over 23% of GDP. So how can countries resolve this issue? Because it seems to be, very prevalent in many countries around the world.
In 5 minutes.
Okay. That's an excellent question. We're going to discuss this in my class. I think is a very delicate process in which you slowly need to force people into the formal economy without choking them. So
what does that mean?
It means that if you are a very, very poor country and you impose the US level of regulation, nobody can operate. And so you kill the economy. So you can't go to Haiti and say you need to have the standards of safety that you have in the United States. People die in the street every day, so it's not even worth for them a standard of safety, but also will really kill the economy, or even in Bolivia. On the other hand, if you are not careful in slowly nudging these firms to become part of the formal sector, you have a level of unfair competition and a less of a push to increase productivity. I think one of the reasons, in my view, why Italy has not been growing productivity is because you have a shadow economy that competes with the formal economy. And the shadow economy by design needs to be constrained. So, for example, I cannot use a lot of ICT in the shadow economy because ICT, by definition, information communication technology, because it leaves a trace. And if I have shadow, I want to be cash. I want to be sort of under the table. I want to be no record. And so I cannot take advantage of a lot of modern innovation in order to basically evade the taxes. And so now we are in a situation in which you have too many businesses that compete, not paying taxes, not following the regulation, and make it difficult for the one who want to be on the up and up to compete. And that's very dangerous. So it's a very delicate balance that you need to start low and then up the ante constantly, and never too abruptly, because if you make a big jump, then you have all of a sudden 10% of the economy that is sort of killed. And of course, there is the revolt. And when Mario Monti was prime minister 10 years ago, he started to tax the hell out of everybody. And the country kind of revolted, because you can't overnight kill 10% of the economy. You need slowly to nudge the 10% to become first 9 and 8 and 7, and to slowly get into better opportunities.
That's interesting. So are you still have time, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, you could, if you can do it in 2
A
minutes.
slight follow-up. So I won't take that much time. So are you suggesting that basically if you eliminate cash, like maybe you institute a digital currency, like how much would that decrease these shadow economies? If, obviously everything is under the table. You're mentioning crypto earlier. I love crypto, by the way. So we don't need to talk about that. But like, if you eliminate cash and just put a digital currency, is that a solution that could work?
I think it helps. Now, you don't want to eliminate cash completely. I have a 95, almost 96 years old mother in Italy, and we give her a credit card. Now they require the PIN for the credit card, and she doesn't remember the PIN of the credit card. And so that is a big issue. And it's not that she make major purchases, but I think that she would like to go out and buy some stuff. And so I think that we need to be respectful that cash in small quantity is very useful for a lot of people. However, as you probably know, in Italy, there were some limits on the use of cash for purchases. And the first thing that the right-wing government did was to increase that level. And that is really a subsidy to the Black economy and to the criminals. And so say you go to Milan in the major street, you find everything written in Russian. Why? Is because they come from Russia, and most of them come with cash. They don't come with credit card. So the moment you limit the purchase with cash, then you have the backlash of the stores and etc.
Interesting.
Utsoff, if you want to come down and get a mic, we are going to open it up for everyone to ask questions. I am going to take producer privilege and ask the first question, which is, in our solicitation for questions, you asked everyone not to ask you about your favorite soccer team. So what's up with your favorite soccer team, and why won't you talk about it?
So I'm a loyal guy. So at age 3, I asked my brother what he was supporting, and was supporting International AC, and my sister was supporting National AC, and my father was supporting Milan AC. And I decided to equate a family to support Milan AC. And it's been mostly a life of pain, okay? First was a life of pain because during the years in which I was in Italy, Milan AC was doing terrible, even ended up in 2nd division. It was really, really painful, okay? Then was bought by Berlusconi and became phenomenal. First of all, when I was in the United States, at the time when nobody was watching soccer, it was impossible to see the games. So I missed the magic moment. Plus, was always kind of ruined by the fact that Berlusconi was behind it. So I thought that my love for Milan AC was stronger than my hate for Berlusconi. So I maintained my support for Milan AC, but I couldn't rejoice as much as I would have. And now Berlusconi is gone. And Milan AC started losing again, and recently lost 5-1 in the derby against International AC. So I think that was very painful.
You have to deal with that. Raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question, and we'll bring the mic around.
Hi, so good to see you again. I have a question about what you said about direct democracy earlier. And I know Tocqueville and I think Democracy in America talked about how his fear was that tyranny in the United States would come from a majoritarian system where the will of the majority terrorizes the minority. And I guess to the theme of the podcast, if monopoly power is dangerous, if the concentration of power is in, like, I guess the demos, like the people, is that it's in and of itself a danger as well? And should there be institutions to balance that power, or is direct democracy inherently kind of a good thing, regardless of that concern?
No, I think direct democracy relies very much on a lively market for information intermediaries. In a sense, you were mentioning earlier direct democracy in Turkey. If you don't have freedom of the press, or if you don't have a lively free press, I think it's very dangerous to have direct democracy, because then it's just rubber stamping whatever is in power. So I think that if you have a large enough educated public and large enough information intermediary that provides alternative, then there's not a set majority. The view of abortions, in my view, should be orthogonal to your view on the economy and your view on immigration, because they're different. And so I don't think that there is necessarily a one coalition that does everything in one dimension. That's what parties are about, that tend to bundle ideas to form a stable coalition and keep ruling. And while I think parties play a role, of course, in democracy, but I fear a tyranny of the party more than I fear the tyranny of the educated public at large.
Great, thanks. In the middle?
Hi, Professor. What do you think about the increasing aggressiveness of the SEC over the past recent years? So I work for a financial institution, and we were recently fined for using WhatsApp along with essentially every other business in the region. Do you think this is oh, and we didn't really understand this to be illegal until we were fined for it? So do you think this is overreach, or do you think this is appropriately punishing Wall Street?
That's a very good question. Actually, in my class, I show a hearing of Gensler, in which was asked in Congress whether Ripple was a security or a currency. And he avoided answer for 15 minutes. I don't remember who was asking him, but he was really, really aggressive. And then a few days later, the SEC came down with a decision saying that everybody should have known that Ripple was a security. And so you have, on the one hand, the head of the commission not willing to answer Congress because it's a complicated thing, and then next day say everybody should have known from the beginning. So I think that especially when it comes to crypto, there might be a bit of a overly aggressive stand. I think that historically, the SEC has not been very aggressive in his pursuit of corporate fraud. I think that maybe the cryptocurrency are seen as the outsiders, and it's easier to go after the outsiders to go after the normal businesses. So if you have to go after Google is one thing, but going after sort of a crypto exchange is easier. This said, I think that I am worried about the level of safety of most of the crypto world. In a sense, what has transpired about the FTX case is that there are no rules. Now, if you believe in a world in which everybody can do whatever they want with their money and we shouldn't protect anybody, then you basically say you don't believe in the SEC. I think that especially when it comes to savings, especially when it comes to retirement savings, because we're forcing people to do it, and we are on the hook, because if they don't have that contribution at the end of the day, you and I have to pay the taxes to support them. I think a minimum level of scrutiny should be done. So I was terrified, for example, when there were advertisements of IRAs that were investing in cryptos, because it seems to me that this is not the place where you want to put your retirement money. Now, there is a place to gamble, and there is a casino, but your IRA is not one.
Great, thank you.
Hi, thank you, Professor. I'd like to follow up with about your answer about the shadow economy, and I'm intrigued by your answer. You know, we should actually nudge the shadow economy to be more formalized. And I think my question is twofold. Perhaps the first part is, what does it mean by informal economy or shadow economy? Because I think I worked in a social protection organization before, and we grapple with the real definition of shadow economy. And second part is I agree with you about the efforts of more formalizing the shadow economy, but I have a reservation, especially when we work in a more a very variety deep culture economy where informal economy such as the culture of hawking on the streets, it gives a soul and meaning to the city. So what does it mean by formalizing it? Was it to be captured by the banking institutions, or to be captured by the formal institutions of the state in terms of tax, or organizing in a manner of where we can see them in a centralized place? So that's perhaps my questions.
So I think that the informal economy is the economy that takes place outside of the rules imposed to operate in a particular sector. And so part of the trick is how tight you make those rules. And if you sell marijuana today in Illinois, that's a formal economy, but until whatever 2 years ago, that was informal and not informal, illegal, because it was outside. So very much is a function of what you allow and what you don't allow. And my inclination is trying to be, especially when the externalities are not too big, to allow more things rather than fewer things, because it's costly to enforce, and because I want to facilitate people to be able to use the legal system to defend themselves. Because one of the problems of the informal economy is that you cannot use the legal system when you have a dispute. And so workers tend to be exploited because they can't protect themselves. You find it difficult to borrow because you have no track record, and so on and so forth. So I think that is very important to give the benefits of the rule of law to as many businesses as possible. That's the reason why I'm saying you want to bring as many businesses as possible in the formal economy. Now, do you want to tax the young girl who sell cookies outside of the church? Seems like a bit excessive. So you don't want to be overdoing it, but as long as they remain marginal things. So they say, if they fundraise selling cookies outside is not a problem, but if they develop a business of cookie sales, and then some of those cookies might not be healthy, or might even be impacted by E. coli or some other viruses or whatever, some other potential disease, etc., then of course you need to intervene. So I think I want to be as tolerant as possible, but also at the same time understand that there are some minimum rules of the game, that you don't want to tolerate people that abuse their workers because they are not official workers, that sell you defective products. So to me, one of the most compelling arguments, for example, to legalize drugs is that illegal drugs tend to be cut with a lot of dangerous stuff. And so the vast majority of people who died of overdose were dying of overdose because they were injecting or smoking or whatever stuff that was not pure, was not of decent quality. So I think that it's very important to have a degree of protection of consumer, for example, and you can have a protection without having some formal rules. So I think that you don't want to eliminate the rules. You don't want to make the rules so tough that everybody is outside of the system.
I want to return back to the theme of cost of enforcement. So I don't know if you're familiar with the studies where it shows that like a certain degree of organized crime keeps crime down overall in the society. And like, I guess the reasoning behind that is that like the mafia is going to follow their own personal self-interest. They're going to do more surveillance and protect their own interest, and therefore like keep certain crimes down more. And basically, if you compare that to like a current traditional model of criminal justice, so we have like the government will do has our own. We basically are trying to enforce the law. We pay to do that, and also it's easy to corrupt. So there's tons of instances. So it's very easy to sway certain politicians or to evade laws with money and power. So I guess I'm wondering if there's like an argument to scale kind of the model of organized crime as a third party thing where there's incentives that are shifted to enforce that, like the way that the mafia is doing it, but not exactly the way the mafia is doing it, but kind of taking a lesson from that where they're taking their own self-interest and they're bearing all the costs and all the rewards as well. Yeah, I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that.
This is a tough question. I tend to be Weberian in this, and I think that the state should have a monopoly on the use of violence in a certain territory, precisely because competition among the use of violence is very dangerous. So the part you don't see of the mafia is that their position is temporary, and there are besides the war between the mafia and the government, there are even wars among mafia families, and those are extremely disruptive and extremely dangerous. So I'm not so sure that besides any moral consideration, even from a practical point of view, I'm not so sure that you want to have a system of delegation of that type. I think that I much prefer having a system of strong enforcement, centralized, and I think there are ways to minimize the corruption. One of my favorite mechanisms is the whistleblower reward system, in which you are rewarded when you bring information that really undermines a current situation, expose current corruption, and so on and so forth. Not only you are protected, that's a minimum, but also you are rewarded in that direction. And why? Because that really discourage people from even thinking about doing a crime. So I think that that's the first part. But the second is we have to remember that order is a combination of repression and consent. Okay, so the consent is a very important component, because if we all decide that we don't respect the law, there are not enough policemen to keep us in place. And when this happens in societies, it's terrible. So I think it's very important to have a not only a functioning system, but also a system that is legitimate in the eyes of people around, because without that legitimacy, people don't buy into it. And if they don't buy into it, make really enforcement very hard. Okay. The best way is when most people do it voluntarily. And I think that in this country, most people pay the taxes voluntarily, because we know from the statistics the probability of being caught if you don't pay your taxes is really, really low. And I think that there is an element of consensual agreement. And that's the reason why I always thought it was very dangerous when politicians in Italy were like saying that, the government is stealing money from people through taxes, and you have right not to pay taxes, because then you start to create a consensus on the alternative, and then maintaining a functioning state in that under those conditions is very, very difficult.
As his producer, he technically can't leave till I end the episode, but I think we're coming up on time. So maybe one more quick question. Someone has one?
Hi there. We spoke earlier about antitrust law as one way to rein in some of the negative effects of the influence or power that big tech firms have. I'm curious your thoughts about an alternate path. So, if individuals were given exclusive and perpetual rights to own their likeness and the metadata they produce through digitally mediated interactions, um, that would force interoperability and transparency. And I'm curious what you think about that as a path, because it would address both the harms done by traditional big tech firms, but then also firms that rely on aggregating data through other mechanisms, even if they're media firms or things like that.
I think it's a very interesting idea. I do think that antitrust is not the only solution, and I am a big supporter of interoperability. The idea of empowering everybody with their data, first of all, technically, we have that power to refuse today, but we give it away very easily, especially because you have to subscribe to something. And a colleague of mine was saying, I have the kids at the lab school, and the homework of the kids are on Facebook, and I need to connect with Facebook. And, you know, there is the terms and condition, but if you were to read all the terms and condition, you will not work because there are so many. So I think that my fear is just empowering the individual with that ownership might not be the right thing because of the ease in which we consent. And two, imagine this was very, very effective. There will be significant costs. So one of the big advantages of big data is that we can find regularities, for example, in medicine, and cure diseases in a much more effective way. So one of the things that people at Microsoft are studying, for example, is the first thing you do when you have a strange symptom is you Google. Now, if you're at Microsoft, you Bing, but nobody Bing. So you Google. And then if you are able to connect the medical record of somebody with what they Google, then you find, take the pancreas cancer that is a killer and it's mostly asymptomatic. And by the time you find out, you're dead, basically. If you can see some regularities that people that later on are diagnosed with pancreatic cancer early on at some symptoms, that could save an enormous amount of life. So I think that there is potentially too much protection of certain data. Now, I don't want to give necessarily my identity in the face of everybody, but if there is a way to connect my medical information with my Google information without my name being there, is something that I think is extremely good for society. So I think that the secret is how to do that effectively. And I'm sorry to say, or some people will say, I have to say that I think that India is ahead of everybody in that dimension, because they have created a government-owned identity that is individual, electronic identity, and they have created a system of payment which is available to everybody to use. So there is no monopoly of anybody. So there is interoperability on that, and they are creating forms of sharing their data under certain conditions. And I think that we need to experiment more. Now, of course, in the United States, this is made difficult because there are 2 or 3 behemoths who live out of the ownership of this data. So any change would be super disruptive on their business model and the evaluation. So I think that we're a bit more sort of blocked by that. But I think that's the direction to go.
Thank you so much to our fantastic students. You were great. Thank you to our audience. Thank you to everyone who came out. If you're a fan of the podcast, please tell a friend, a family member, someone to listen. That's how these things tend to spread. Thank you to Luigi. You good sport. You can always root for Miami FC. They got Messi now. Maybe it'll be a little easier on you. But thank you to everyone. This is great.